Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Brian. Today we are back with our last list going over releases from 2024. This list specifically goes over American single malts, rums, not whiskeys, or at least not in the traditional sense. Maybe there's some blended products in here as well, but these are generally categories that expand beyond usually the bourbons and the ryes that we normally talk about in the other lists that we've seen. Like my everyday list that you might have seen last, this is a list that's not going to be in any particular order. The flavors here are all over the place, and I feel like it's easier just to list the 10 products that I wanted to highlight here, the producers I wanted to highlight here, and maybe give you something to expand your palate on in year 2025. While I have you here, if you haven't already, jump down below, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, help me continue to grow the channel here in 2025. Let me know what your favorite not whiskey or American single malt was in 2024. Let's jump right into the list. You may have heard me talk about this brand before when I'm talking about American single malts, but this cider-finished Westward Whiskey was one of my favorite American single malts that I visited this year. Obviously, you saw my Rare and Limited list, we saw the Milestone, but Westward Whiskey is the brand that I feel like are making really unique American single malts. They have these kind of stone fruity-like qualities and then a lot of this kind of chocolate malt finish thing to it. This particular barrel was finished for 6 months in 2 Towns cider barrels, and I feel like while it has kind of the stone fruity-like notes that I'm used to with Westward in general, it adds these big, bright green apple, caramel-like notes to it and then finishes a little bit more like Dutch apple pie. Westward is often experimenting with a lot of different finishing casks, so finding one like this may be a bit difficult, but still, I feel like they stay true to their flavor profile, and it's a really unique one if you're interested in diving into American single malts. That's first on the list, Westward Whiskey with this caramel apple bomb, cider finished American single malt. Next on the list is one that I tried earlier in the year when we were visiting our friends in kind of the Kansas City, Missouri area, but I know it's not going to be for everyone. That happens to be the J. Rieger Monogram. For them, Kansas City whiskey is a blend of bourbon, rye, and light corn whiskey. This specifically was Solera aged in these sherry botas for up to 48 months. And with that, I feel like this satisfies what I look for in a flavored whiskey without really leaning towards a bourbon profile, a rye profile, or anything like that. It's deep, it's rich, and again, I think it's a little bit funky, and I think that's because of the kind of sherry botas that it's in with the Solera aging. And so I think that there's some flavors to this that may not appease to everybody, but I think it's a fun whiskey to reach for. Again, if I kind of want that flavored whiskey sort of profile, but I don't really want to lean towards a specific spirit. So it gives me kind of like an interesting general flavor profile when I still want whiskey, but I don't really want kind of the ready to drink batch cocktail type of profiles. That's when I reach for this J. Rieger Monogram. Next on the list, we go to Tucson, Arizona, and we visit Whiskey Delach. Now this is their Normandy release, and this is French Calvados finished. They're doing really interesting things with Whiskey Delach. Some of their other products, I don't know about this one. They're taking their malt and they're doing like a mesquite smoke to kind of give their own flair to the Scottish styles. Again, I don't know if they're doing that with the base in this one specifically. However, I feel like you have kind of a nice, warming American single malt complemented by the citrus notes that come in from the French Calvados. Big funk, caramel apple, kind of these sour cherry notes. A lot of citrus, but it still has caramel and stone fruit as well to it. But then it comes back to this kind of smoky, drying pepperiness that makes Whiskey Delach kind of unique in the American single malt type category and leans a little bit more to maybe kind of the smoked, kind of peated Scotch type profile that some people may expect. Now, it's not a Scotch, so don't think that you're going to necessarily get the depth and maybe some of the roundness that you might with a Scotch. But if you want to scratch that itch a little bit and you're curious to try maybe some other American single malt type products, but they lean more that flavor profile, Whiskey Delach is a really unique one that you might want to have on your radar. Continuing with American single malts, we are going to talk about this old line American single malt, and this one was double oaked in a Sauterne barrel. I think what I loved about this one from the get-go is how rich and viscous it was on the palate with so many different layers of fruits. And again, all the different types of fruits that you can find. Red fruits, grape, melon, citrus. There was like a whole plethora of fruit that happened on the palate here. Really creamy, really enveloping, but still had good balance. It had touches of floral. I mean, this hit on almost everything. A really nice explosion of flavor, but contained, and just a really beautiful example of American single malts, finished American single malts, kind of touching on what a finishing cask can do to really expand the palate. Still has this nice kind of coffee finish as well. I was really impressed with this double oaked, the sauterne finish old line this year. Moving into something that I think might be a little bit more resonant with more people happens to come from Penelope, and this is their American light whiskey. Now, this bottle specifically was one of the Sealbox picks, but they're 15-year that they released, and as we've seen them release already, they're going to be coming out with a 17-year. These are some of the most fun American light whiskey profiles I feel like we see on the market. And they're not the only ones doing this. I mean, we've seen this from folks like Bull Run and others, but these American light whiskeys are usually really big in their proof, really big in their flavor, but they have a palate that's really approachable for a bourbon drinker because they have these very big vanilla cupcake-like profiles. And the benefit of the older age that you're getting into, again, from Penelope and others, is that it tames down some of that sweetness with a little bit of oak. Not a lot of oak. Don't read that age as the same way that you would read that in an aged bourbon, but it definitely has some complementing pepper and other nuances as well that will keep it from being overly sweet in a lot of cases. Either way, I liked the 13-year release when it came out a little bit ago. I'm looking forward to the 17-year release, but I thought these 15-year releases, single barrels or the batch product either way, from Penelope were a really good example of just a really nice contained version of what you get in these American light whiskeys. Taking that type of flavor profile one step forward this year, we started seeing these Canadian whiskeys coming out from Nashville Barrel Company with a whopping 33-year age statement. And a lot of these things were hazmat. If you were one who liked that kind of cakey profile from those American light whiskeys like the Penelope, maybe they're too sweet for you and you wish there was a little bit more dimension. These Canadian whiskeys from Nashville Barrel Company take all of those flavors and they ramp them up. They add a little bit more depth. They add more nuance. They add more complexity. They definitely add more oak. It basically takes everything about the American light whiskey and turns it into a more rounded experience. If that was too sweet for you or kind of leaned to one direction, I find this more easy to drink, more easy to go to, and definitely more interesting to explore. That is this Nashville Barrel Company 33-year Canadian whiskey. This next product is a bit of an outlier on the list. It is blended with bourbon. This comes from Dancing Goat Distillery. This is Tommy's Malted Bang Dog. If you want to talk about the weirdest title of a whiskey release of the year award, it'd go to Dancing Goat. That said, Dancing Goat has been experimenting with a whole lot of different products and blends of theirs, and compared to other brands, I feel like does one of the better jobs of keeping it price conscious for people to kind of dabble and explore. This one right here is an 8-year 21% bourbon mixed with an 8-year 100% malt whiskey. This thing was wacky on the palate. Tons of flavor. It pulls you in a bunch of different directions, but it's one I found myself, especially after it was open, continuously coming back to. It's like, gives me the flavors of a bourbon, then it doesn't give me the flavors of the bourbon. It's like really turned up, and then it's like, got some wacky things. It's kind of a roller coaster, but I think it has a lot of the things that I look for when I'm going to get a whiskey in here, and throws a whole bunch of curveballs as well. If you want to try kind of a weird, kind of interesting experience, these Dancing Goat releases that they put out, specifically Tommy's Malted Bang Dog, you have In Lieu of Flowers. They have some interesting experimental things that they're doing, making really interesting blends. And again, price conscious, so it allows you to kind of dabble, just see what you think, not wasting too much money in order to do that. I think that's probably the best thing about them. However, one I kept coming back to throughout the year, throwing in some blinds as well just to see how it did, that's this release number 5, Tommy's Malted Bang Dog. I was a little torn about which of these I wanted to put into this list because I actually tried both of them for the first time this year, although the newest batch and probably most likely to be needed to go on a list for 2024 is this Gypsy Legacy Batch 2. Now, this is kind of celebrity whiskey style. Eric Church has his name tied to this. But when you're thinking about blended products, I feel like we're starting to see more of that happen into 2024, and I hope we continue to see it in 2025. You've got folks like Found North messing with all types of products, and people are really enjoying that. And I feel like an underdog or maybe a less talked about line right now is Whiskey Gypsy. I really like their batch 1. I forget all what that was made up of, but this one right here is 60% American whiskey, 11 years old, 36% Canadian rye, 18 years old, and 4% of an Indian single malt that's 10 years old. Great age statement, and it's showing a really unique mixture of all different types of whiskeys that can go into this. Surprisingly enough, I feel like the flavor profiles that come from this bottle are more like the flavor profiles people look for in limited release bourbon releases. There's a lot of deep, dark, rustic fruit notes. There's a lot of age, and there's a lot of big, clinging mouthfeel. Now, while there's a little bit more smoke than you'd expect from, let's say, a rare release of a bourbon, I think somebody would be really surprised if they tried this against some of the limited edition bourbons that they've liked in the past, and they might find that they like the flavors in here. I'm excited to continue to see what they come out with in their product line, especially in this kind of legacy blend of products. Again, loved batch 1, really enjoyed the depth and complexity that comes here in batch 2. That is this Gypsy Legacy batch 2. This is another one that's hard for me to highlight because this is a brand coming out. They're highlighting brandies and cognacs. They're coming from the folks at Rolling Fork Rum, and this is their line of Wayward Cask. Now, they have a whole bunch of different products coming out, from these Calvados to Armagnacs, and it's a tie. It's a tie. It doesn't matter in this list. I think the things that Wayward Cask is doing, the types of spirits that they're highlighting, are worth noting. This 25-year Apple Calvados, for example, from Page Doge, really unique. I mean, this thing is earthy, funky. It's got crisp apple as well, lots of oak. I mean, this is really interesting to explore, yet maybe a little bit challenging on the palate. I think the best thing about these whiskeys that they're doing with the Wayward Cask, though, is that they're coming in at cask strength. And I think that these are types, especially at the age, of releases you don't generally see coming out at cask strength. So it's nice to be able to explore, relatively affordable for what they are. I have another Calvados down here. It's 15 years old. It's a pear Calvados. So it's neat to be able to try the variants that they're bringing into these spirits. Again, this Calvados, wild, earthy. However, you switch it up a little bit, and then you've got something like this 2000 release Armagnac. Now, Armagnac is not a category I'm probably going to personally just continue to dive deep into, nor is it one I would say I'm super experienced on. I've had a handful of them, and I will also say I love this 2000 Armagnac. A little bit rounder, a little bit less out there, I think, than that 25-year Calvados. A little bit more grounding caramel and an interesting oak. It goes to the flavors I would lean towards a little bit more. But what I love about both of these is how expansive they are. If you're going to sit down with them, it will teeter on these flavor experiences that you just didn't necessarily know. I feel like when you get into these kind of brandies, these kind of grape variety spirits, I think you learn that in some cases, a lot of the whiskeys we drink are very narrow in their palate. And when you get a whiskey or a spirit like this, I should say, you realize that they have these expansive, evolving profiles. And I can understand why then you have so many wine drinkers out there with these crazy experiences they have as a glass opens. I think you find some of those types of flavors in a glass like this if you spend some time with them. Really enjoying these releases coming out from Wayward Cask, and I hope we see some more of those in 2025. Now look, this might be a guilty pleasure, and this was in no specific order. But if there was going to be a number one, it might have to be this one that my friend Michael let me try earlier in the year. This is this Ronlo Santos 18-year Panamanian rum. This is not imported into the States, so getting it in the States is not super easy. However, when I first tried this, just on a whim when we were visiting, it has a sweetness, a depth to it, even at its 80 proof, that I just thought was super enjoyable. I think that there are other rums that I try throughout the year, and they're quirky in their own ways. And again, not a rum expert either. Kind of like the brandies, kind of like the Armagnacs, not something I specialize in. I don't visit them all that much. Leave me some of your recommendations down below. However, from the rums that I have had, and probably in part because of the proof here, this was super easy to drink. It had lots of depth, it had lots of flavor, obviously kind of this ramped up kind of caramelized sugar profile as we would expect. But I don't often get a chance to visit Panamanian rums, and it throws me back to when I got a chance to visit with Panama. It just is kind of one of those transportative, what's it called? Transportive pours. Thank you, Michael, who happens to be sitting in the room. Pours for me, and I just thought it was really enjoyable, very nostalgic, kind of threw it back a little bit, and maybe not as much complexity, maybe not as much oomph as some of the other ones on the list, and that's why I didn't number them. but one I just really enjoyed thinking about. In fact, I had to have Michael come. He's sitting right on the other side of the camera. I had to have him bring this bottle back if it existed so that I could try it again, because I had it on my list earlier in the year and I wanted to revisit it to make sure it's still on the list. And guess what? It's still on the list. That's the Ronlo Santos. If you know how to find these in the States, please let me know. This might be something I need to try and see about bringing in for Sealbox or something, because I love this rum, and I'd love to be able to revisit it on other occasions. That is the Ronlo Santos 18-year Panamanian rum. And that does it for another video, guys. I hope it was insightful, informational, maybe expanded a little bit of some brands or some product lines to some other types of things that aren't necessarily on your radar or that you don't necessarily go to. But this is just a snapshot of some of the off bourbon and rye things that I had to try this year that I really, really enjoyed. We'll be back with some more content sometime soon. I don't know. I'm done with my top list. The only list I would have left is if I do my ready-to-drink list, so like bottled Negroni or old-fashioned Manhattan-type products that I tried in the year. Let me know if you actually want to see that down in the comments below. Until next time, everybody, we'll see you all later.